The boarding announcement echoed through Terminal C as I clutched my hospital pre-admission papers, watching my daughter Jessica check her phone for the third time in 2 minutes. "Mom, are you sure about this timing?" she asked, not looking up from her screen. "The flight to Denver leaves in 40 minutes, and honestly, your surgery isn't until tomorrow morning. Can't you just take a taxi to the hospital?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at her, feeling the familiar knot form in my stomach. Here I was, 58 years old, about to undergo major spinal surgery that could leave me paralyzed if something went wrong, and my own daughter was worried about missing her ski trip. "Jessica, we talked about this. You promised you'd drive me to the hospital tonight so I could get settled before the procedure." She rolled her eyes and gestured toward her husband Brad, who was loading their ski equipment onto a cart. "Mom, it's not like you're dying, it's back surgery. People have it all the time. Besides, Brad already paid for the resort, and we haven't had a vacation in months." My son Marcus appeared from the coffee shop, carrying a large cup and wearing that same dismissive expression he'd perfected since graduating college. "Mom, you're being dramatic. The hospital is literally 20 minutes from here. Just call an Uber. We've been planning this trip for weeks." "I've been planning this surgery for months," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The doctor said I needed someone to stay with me overnight, to help me get ready, to be there when I wake up. I asked you both to be there." Jessica sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that made me feel like a burden. "Look, we'll be back Sunday night. Your surgery is Friday morning. You'll be fine by then. The nurses will take care of everything." I looked around the bustling airport, watching families hugging goodbye, couples holding hands, people caring for each other. Then I looked at my children, both adults now, both successful in their own right, both treating me like an inconvenience. "So you're just going to leave me here?" Brad spoke up for the first time, his voice carrying that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "Gail, you're a grown woman. You raised 2 kids on your own after David died. You can handle one little surgery. We'll send you flowers." The words hit me like a physical blow. One little surgery. I'd been living with chronic pain for 3 years, barely sleeping, unable to lift anything heavier than a coffee cup some days. The surgeon had explained the risks, the possibility of nerve damage, the long recovery ahead, and they were calling it one little surgery. "I can't believe this," I said, more to myself than to them. "I can't believe my own children are abandoning me at an airport when I need them most." Marcus stepped closer, and for a moment I thought he might change his mind. Instead, he pulled out his wallet and handed me 3 $20 bills. "Here, this should cover the taxi and tip. We'll call you after the surgery to check in." I stood there holding the money, feeling smaller than I had in years. These were the same children I'd worked double shifts to support after their father died in that car accident 10 years ago. The same kids I'd driven to every soccer game, every school play, every college visit. I'd sold my wedding ring to pay for Jessica's wedding, and I'd co-signed Marcus's student loans when the bank turned him down. "Final boarding call for Flight 1847 to Denver," the announcement crackled overhead. Jessica grabbed her carry-on bag and gave me a quick, perfunctory hug. "We really have to go, Mom. The surgery will be fine. You're tough. You've been through worse." Marcus patted my shoulder awkwardly. "Take care of yourself. We'll talk soon." And then they were gone, walking toward their gate without looking back, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the terminal with my overnight bag and a handful of cash. I watched them disappear into the crowd, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was something colder, more final. I'd raised them to be independent, but I'd never taught them to be cruel. Yet here I was, abandoned by my own flesh and blood, when I needed them most. The worst part wasn't that they left. The worst part was how easily they did it. Like my fear and pain meant nothing to them. I picked up my bag and walked toward the taxi stand, my back screaming with every step. The driver was kind, helping me with my bag, asking if I was okay when he saw me wiping away tears. "Hospital?" he asked gently, and I nodded. During the ride, I thought about calling my sister Linda, but she lived in Florida now, and besides, I'd already asked too much of her over the years. I thought about calling my best friend Ruth, but she was dealing with her own mother's dementia. I had acquaintances from work, but we weren't close enough for something like this. The truth was, I'd spent so much time being a mother, being the strong one, being the provider, that I'd forgotten to build a life for myself. My children had been my world, and now they'd made it clear that I wasn't even a footnote in theirs. The hospital loomed ahead, all glass and steel and sterile lighting. I paid the driver with some of the money Marcus had given me, and he helped me to the entrance. "Good luck with your surgery," he said, and I realized this stranger had shown me more kindness in 20 minutes than my own children had in months. I checked in at the front desk, filled out forms, and was shown to a small room where I'd spend the night before my surgery. The nurse, a woman about my age named Carmen, was warm and professional. She explained the preoperative procedures, gave me a hospital gown, and asked if I had any questions. "My family," I started, then stopped. "They couldn't make it tonight. Will someone be able to call them after the surgery?" Carmen nodded understandingly. "Of course. We'll need their contact information. Will they be here for your discharge?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure. They're out of town." She frowned slightly. "Mrs. Richardson, this is major surgery. You'll need someone to help you at home for at least a week, maybe longer. Do you have anyone else who can assist with your recovery?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Did I have anyone else? The answer was no, but I wasn't about to admit that to this kind stranger. "I'll figure something out," I said. That night, lying in the narrow hospital bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to prepare myself for what was coming. Not just the surgery, but the recovery. The long days ahead with no one to help me, no one to care if I was in pain or scared or lonely. My children had made their choice, and now I had to live with the consequences. But as I drifted off to sleep, something else was taking shape in my mind. A memory I'd pushed aside for years, something my late husband David had told me shortly before he died. Something about investments, about accounts I'd never touched, about planning for the future in ways I'd never fully understood. Tomorrow I'd face the surgery alone, but maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to face everything else alone. Maybe it was time to stop being the victim and start being the architect of my own life. The morning of my surgery arrived with the mechanical sounds of the hospital waking up around me. Nurses changing shifts, breakfast carts rattling down hallways, the distant hum of machines keeping people alive. I'd barely slept, my mind racing between fear of the surgery and the hollow ache of abandonment that had settled in my chest. Dr. Martinez appeared in my doorway at 7 sharp, clipboard in hand, and that reassuring smile that had convinced me to trust him with my spine. "Good morning, Gail. How are we feeling today?" "Ready," I lied, sitting up carefully. The truth was, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. But I wasn't about to tell him that. "Just want to get this over with." He pulled up a chair and sat down, something that surprised me. Most doctors stayed standing, always in a hurry to move on to the next patient. "I want to go over the procedure one more time, and I need to ask about your support system."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"The surgery will take about 4 hours, and recovery will be challenging. You mentioned your children would be here?" I looked down at my hands, folded in my lap. They had to travel. Family emergency. The lie came easily, and I hated myself for protecting them even now. Dr. Martinez nodded, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "Gail, I'm going to be straight with you. This isn't the kind of surgery you recover from alone. You'll need help with basic daily activities for at least 2 weeks. Cooking, cleaning, getting to follow-up appointments. Do you have other family members or friends who can assist?" I almost told him the truth then. Almost broke down and admitted that my children had chosen a ski vacation over their mother's surgery, that I had no one, that I was terrified of facing the recovery alone. But pride is a stubborn thing, And I'd had a lifetime of practice at being strong. I have it handled, I said firmly. I'm tougher than I look. He studied my face for a long moment, and I wondered if he could see through my facade. All right, but I want you to promise me something. If you need help, if you're struggling at all during recovery, you call us. We have resources, home health aides, recovery programs. Don't try to be a hero. I nodded, even though we both knew I wouldn't call. I'd never been good at asking for help, and I wasn't about to start now. The preoperative preparations were a blur of IVs and consent forms and questions I answered on autopilot. The anesthesiologist was kind, explaining what would happen, promising I'd be comfortable. A surgical nurse marked my back with a purple marker, confirming the location of the problem discs that had been stealing my life one day at a time. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time I'd felt truly cared for. It had been months, maybe years. Even before David died, I'd been the caregiver, the one who held everything together. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be the one being taken care of. The last thing I remembered was the anesthesiologist's voice telling me to count backwards from 10, and then everything went dark. I woke up in recovery with the worst thirst I'd ever experienced, and a strange numbness in my legs that made me panic, until a nurse named Kevin explained that it was normal, that the feeling would return gradually. The surgery had gone well, Dr. Martinez told me when he stopped by. The damaged discs had been removed, the vertebrae fused, and while recovery would be long, I should eventually be pain-free for the first time in years. Your daughter called, Kevin mentioned while checking my vitals. She wanted to know how you were doing. I told her you were stable and recovering well. Jessica had called. Not visited, not rushed home from her vacation, but called. It was something, I supposed, though it felt like the bare minimum of human decency rather than parental love. Did she leave a message? I asked. Kevin shook his head. Just wanted to confirm you'd made it through surgery okay. She said she'd call back later. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital, slowly regaining feeling in my legs, learning to walk with a walker, taking more pain medication than I'd ever taken in my life. The physical therapy was brutal, but I forced myself through it, driven by the knowledge that I had no choice. There would be no one at home to help me if I couldn't help myself. Jessica called once more, a brief conversation where she sounded distracted and kept mentioning how beautiful the mountains were. Marcus sent a text. Glad surgery went well. Talk soon. That was the extent of my family's concern. On the third day, Dr. Martinez cleared me for discharge. Remember, he said, no lifting more than 5 pounds, no bending or twisting, follow-up appointment in 2 weeks. And seriously, Gail, consider getting some help at home. This isn't the time to be stubborn. I nodded and signed the discharge papers, then called a taxi to take me home. The ride was agony, every bump in the road sending spikes of pain through my back despite the medication. My small house looked different somehow when I walked through the front door, like it belonged to someone else. Everything seemed too high, too far away, too difficult to reach. The first week was the hardest thing I'd ever endured. Simple tasks like making coffee or getting dressed became monumental challenges. I lived on crackers and canned soup because I couldn't stand long enough to cook anything substantial. Showering was a terrifying ordeal that left me exhausted and shaking. Neither Jessica nor Marcus called during that first week. I told myself they were busy, that they assumed I was fine since I hadn't called them, but deep down I knew the truth. They simply didn't care enough to check. It was during the second week, when I was finally able to walk without the walker and think clearly without the fog of pain medication, that I remembered David's words more clearly. He'd been talking about investments, about accounts he'd set up, about planning for the future. I'd been so consumed with grief after his death that I'd barely paid attention to the financial details, letting his brother handle most of the estate issues. I found David's old filing cabinet in the basement, dusty and forgotten. Inside were files I hadn't looked at in years, documents that David had organized with his typical attention to detail. bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance policies. And something else, something that made my hands shake as I read it. A trust fund. David had established a trust fund years before his death, funded by his life insurance policy and investments I'd never known about. The paperwork was complex, but the bottom line was clear. I was the beneficiary of an account worth nearly $500,000. Money that had been sitting untouched for 10 years, because I'd been too overwhelmed to deal with it. I stared at the documents, reading them over and over to make sure I wasn't imagining things. David had tried to tell me about it before he died, but I'd been so focused on his medical care that I hadn't really listened. His brother had mentioned something about additional assets after the funeral, but I'd been too grief-stricken to pursue it. All these years, I'd been struggling financially, working overtime to pay for Jessica's wedding, co-signing loans for Marcus, living paycheck to paycheck. And all this time, there had been money sitting in an account, waiting for me to claim it. I called the bank the next morning, my hands still shaking as I dialed. The conversation was surreal. Yes, the account existed. Yes, I was the sole beneficiary. Yes, I could access the funds immediately. All I needed to do was come in with proper identification and sign some papers. The trip to the bank was my first real outing since the surgery. I still moved slowly, still relied on a cane for stability, but I felt stronger than I had in weeks. The bank manager, a woman named Patricia, was kind and efficient. She explained the account details, helped me understand the investment options, and arranged for a portion of the funds to be transferred to my checking account. "Your husband was very thorough," Patricia said, reviewing the paperwork. "He set this up specifically for your long-term security. You should be proud of him." I was proud of David, and grateful beyond words. But I was also angry. Angry at myself for not pursuing this years ago. Angry at the financial stress I'd endured unnecessarily. Angry at my children for taking advantage of my perceived poverty. Walking out of the bank, I felt different. Not just because of the money, though that was certainly part of it. For the first time in years, I felt like I had options. I wasn't at the mercy of my children's whims or their convenience. I could make choices based on what I wanted, not what I could afford. That evening, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and my laptop, researching things I'd never had the luxury to consider before. Private recovery services, home health aides, even something as simple as grocery delivery, which would have been impossible on my old budget but was now perfectly affordable. I was scrolling through options when my phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a familiar mixture of hope and dread. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice bright and artificial. "We just got back from Denver. The skiing was amazing. How are you feeling?" "I'm recovering," I said simply. "That's great. I knew you'd be fine. You're so tough. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Brad and I are looking at buying a bigger house, and we were wondering if you might be able to help us with the down payment. I know it's a lot to ask, but the interest rates are going up, and we really need to move soon." I sat in silence for a moment, processing what she'd just said. She hadn't asked how I was eating, if I needed help with groceries, if I was managing my pain medication properly. She'd called to ask for money. "How much?" I asked. "Well, we need about $30,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but you could co-sign the loan, and we'd pay you back over time. Think of it as an investment in our future. $30,000, more than I'd made in a year at my old job. Money I would have borrowed against my credit cards or pulled from my retirement if she'd asked me 2 weeks ago. Money that would have left me financially vulnerable for years to come." "I'll have to think about it," I said. "Really? Mom, we need to put in an offer this week. The market is crazy right now. Can't you just say yes? You've always been there for us. Always been there for them. Like I hadn't been there for my own surgery. Like I hadn't needed them when I was lying in a hospital bed, terrified and alone." I said, "I'll think about it," I repeated, my voice harder now. Jessica's tone shifted, becoming wheedling and manipulative. "Mom, what's wrong? You sound different. Are you still on pain medication? Maybe you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I said, and hung up. Marcus called an hour later, clearly prompted by his sister. Mom, Jessica said you were being weird about the house thing. Are you okay? You're not having some kind of breakdown, are you? I'm fine, I said. Just tired. Look, I know Jessica asked you for a lot of money, but maybe you could help with part of it? Even 10,000 would be huge. I could co-sign with you if that would help. He could co-sign with me. Like I was the risky investment, not the person who'd been supporting both of them for years. Like I was the one who needed their financial backing to be credible. I have to go, I said, and hung up on him too. That night I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to keep being the person who gave everything and received nothing in return. I wasn't going to keep being the mother who was taken for granted, used when convenient, and discarded when inconvenient. I was going to do something I'd never done before. I was going to put myself first. The next morning, I called a home health agency and arranged for a aide to come 3 times a week. I hired a cleaning service, a grocery delivery service, and a lawn care company. I bought new furniture, comfortable pieces that would support my recovering back. I even hired a handyman to install grab bars in my bathroom and a stair lift for the basement steps. For the first time in my adult life, I was spending money on myself without feeling guilty about it. Every purchase was a small act of rebellion against the years of self-sacrifice that had gotten me nothing but abandonment. When Jessica called back 2 days later, her voice was strained. Mom, we really need an answer about the house. The sellers are getting impatient. I've decided not to help with the down payment, I said calmly. What? Why? Mom, this is our future we're talking about. Our family's future. Your family left me alone at an airport when I needed them most, I said. Your family chose a ski vacation over my surgery. Your family doesn't include me unless you need money. There was a long pause. Mom, that's not fair. We couldn't cancel the trip. We'd already paid for everything. And I can't give you money I don't have. But you do have it. You always find a way when we need help. Not anymore, I thought. Out loud, I said, I have to focus on my recovery right now. I can't take on any additional financial obligations. This isn't like you, Jessica said, her voice rising. You've never turned us down before. What's gotten into you? What had gotten into me was the realization that I'd been living my life for other people, and those people had shown me exactly how little I meant to them when I needed them most. What had gotten into me was the discovery that I had resources I'd never known about, resources that could give me independence and choices. I'm hanging up now, I said. I need to rest. Mom, don't do this. Don't punish us because you're angry about the surgery thing. We're sorry, okay? We should have been there, but we can't change it now. You're right, I said. You can't change it, and I can't forget it. I hung up and turned off my phone. Outside, the home health aide was arriving for her first visit. Her name was Rosa, and she was everything my children weren't: attentive, caring, genuinely concerned about my well-being. She helped me with exercises, prepared nutritious meals, and most importantly, she listened when I talked. You're doing so well with your recovery, Rosa said during her second visit. Your strength is improving every day. Do you have family support at home? I hesitated, then decided to tell her the truth. My children live nearby, but they're not involved in my recovery. They had other priorities. Rosa's expression softened with understanding. I see that sometimes. Family can be complicated, but you're strong, and you're taking good care of yourself. That's what matters. She was right. I was taking good care of myself, maybe for the first time in my life, and it felt good. Over the following weeks, I established a routine that centered entirely around my needs and my recovery. I read books I'd never had time for, watched movies that interested me, took long baths without feeling guilty about the water bill. I started physical therapy with a private therapist who came to my house, eliminating the stress of driving to appointments. Jessica and Marcus continued to call, their requests becoming more desperate as they realized I wasn't going to change my mind about the house. They tried guilt, manipulation, even anger. Jessica accused me of being selfish and cruel. Marcus suggested I was having some kind of mental breakdown brought on by the surgery, but I felt clearer than I had in years. The pain medication was behind me, my physical strength was returning, and my emotional clarity was sharper than ever. I wasn't having a breakdown, I was having a breakthrough. It was during my 6-week follow-up appointment that Dr. Martinez commented on my progress. "You're healing remarkably well," he said, reviewing my x-rays. "Much better than I expected for someone recovering alone. You must have excellent support at home." "I do," I said, thinking of Rosa and the other service providers who'd become my support system. "I have exactly the support I need." "That's wonderful. Family can make such a difference in recovery." I almost corrected him, almost explained that my actual family had been useless, and that I'd had to build my own support network. But I realized it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was healing, physically and emotionally, and I was doing it on my own terms. As I drove home from the appointment, I felt a sense of completion. The surgery was behind me, the recovery was progressing well, and I'd learned something valuable about myself and my relationships. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I could take care of myself when necessary, and that I didn't need to accept poor treatment from anyone, even my own children. But I'd also learned something else, something that was about to become very important. David hadn't just left me money, he'd left me property. Property that was about to become the foundation of a new chapter in my life, one where I held all the power and made all the decisions. The real estate documents were in a separate folder in David's filing cabinet, one I'd overlooked during my first search. But Rosa had been encouraging me to organize his papers more thoroughly, and that's when I found them. Deeds to 2 rental properties David had bought as investments, properties I'd completely forgotten about in the chaos following his death. The first was a small apartment building downtown, currently managed by a property management company. The second was a duplex in a trendy neighborhood, also professionally managed. Both were profitable, generating rental income that had been automatically deposited into the trust account for years. I was a landlord. I owned rental properties. I had tenants I'd never met, paying rent I'd never collected, living in buildings I'd never visited. The discovery was overwhelming and empowering at the same time. I called the property management company the next day, introducing myself as the owner and requesting a full report on both properties. The manager, a man named Robert, was surprised to hear from me directly. "We've been managing these properties for your trust for years," he said. "Everything runs smoothly. Did you want to make changes to the management arrangement?" "I'd like to start being more involved," I said. "Can you send me detailed reports on both properties? Tenant information, rental rates, maintenance schedules, everything." "Of course. Is there a particular reason for your increased interest?" I looked around my house, at the comfortable furniture I'd bought with my own money, at the evidence of my independence and self-sufficiency. "I'm ready to take a more active role in my investments." The reports arrived 2 days later, and I spent hours studying them. The apartment building had 4 units, all currently occupied by long-term tenants. The duplex had 2 units, 1 occupied and 1 vacant. Rental rates were competitive, maintenance was up to date, and both properties were generating steady income. But it was the tenant list for the duplex that made my breath catch. The occupied unit was rented to a couple named Jessica and Brad Morrison. Morrison was Jessica's married name. My daughter was renting from me. She'd been paying rent to my property management company for over a year, and she had no idea I was her landlord. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. I called Robert back immediately. "The duplex on Maple Street," I said. "Tell me about the tenants in Unit A." "The Morrisons? They're good tenants. Pay on time, keep the place clean. They've been there about 14 months. Why?" "I'd like to review their lease agreement and rental history." "I can send that over." "Is there a problem?" "No problem. I'd just like to know who's living in my properties." The lease agreement arrived in my email within an hour. There it was, in black and white. Jessica Morrison and Brad Morrison, renting the duplex unit I owned for $1,200 a month. The same Jessica who'd been asking me for money to buy a house, who'd claimed they couldn't afford to miss their ski vacation, who'd abandoned me at the airport because I was too expensive to deal with. They'd been living in my property, paying me rent through a management company, while treating me like a burden. The symmetry was beautiful. I spent the evenings studying their rental history, their lease terms, their payment schedule. They were, as Robert had said, Good tenants. They paid on time, hadn't caused any damage, and had even requested permission before painting the bedroom. Model tenants. Terrible children. That night, I made another decision that would change everything. I was going to take direct control of my properties, starting with the duplex. I was going to become more than just an absentee landlord. I was going to become an active participant in my tenants' lives, particularly the tenants who happened to be my ungrateful children. I called Robert the next morning. "I've decided to take over direct management of the duplex," I said. "I'll handle tenant relations, rent collection, maintenance requests, everything." "Are you sure? Property management can be time-consuming, and you'd be responsible for all the legal requirements, tenant rights, maintenance issues." "I'm sure. I want to be hands-on with this property. Can you transfer all the files to me and notify the tenants of the change?" "Of course. I'll need you to sign some paperwork, and I'll prepare a notice for the tenants. The purchase transition can be effective at the beginning of next month." "Perfect." I hung up and smiled. In 30 days, Jessica and Brad would discover that their rent checks would be going directly to me. They'd learn that their landlord was the same person they'd abandoned at the airport, the same person they'd treated like a burden, the same person they'd asked for money while living in her property. The anticipation was delicious. While I waited for the management transition to take effect, I decided to drive by the duplex and see what my daughter had done with the place. It was a beautiful building, well-maintained and in an excellent neighborhood. David had chosen well when he'd bought it. I parked across the street and studied the property. Unit A, where Jessica and Brad lived, had flower boxes in the windows and a small herb garden by the front door. It looked homey and well cared for. I felt a moment of pride, both in the property and in my daughter's obvious efforts to make it a home. But then I remembered their choice to abandon me when I needed them most, and the pride turned to something harder. They'd had the money to maintain a herb garden and flower boxes, but they couldn't afford to miss a ski vacation to help their mother through surgery. They'd been living in a beautiful home that I owned, paying me rent money that I'd never seen, while asking me for financial help I couldn't afford. The contradiction was staggering. As I sat there, I saw Brad pull into the driveway. He looked the same as always, confident and slightly arrogant, carrying himself like a man who'd never worried about money or consequences. He walked into the house without noticing me, and I felt a surge of anticipation for what was coming. In 3 weeks, their comfortable little world was going to shift dramatically. They'd discover that their independence was an illusion, that they were actually dependent on the same person they'd treated so poorly. They'd learn that actions have consequences, and that abandoning someone when they're vulnerable can come back to haunt you in ways you never imagined. I drove home feeling more energized than I had since before the surgery. My recovery was almost complete, my financial situation was secure, and I was about to reclaim power in a relationship that had been one-sided for far too long. The waiting was almost over. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after I'd taken over management of the duplex. It was addressed to the tenants of 847 Maple Street, Unit A, in my own handwriting, delivered by certified mail to ensure Jessica and Brad would have to sign for it personally. Inside was a formal letter introducing myself as their new landlord, along with updated contact information and payment instructions. I sat in my kitchen with my morning coffee, imagining their faces when they read it. The letter was professional and courteous, giving no indication of our relationship. I'd simply signed it Gail Richardson, property owner, and included my phone number and mailing address. To them, I was just another faceless landlord, taking over their housing situation. My phone rang at 11:37 that morning. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to Jessica's confused message with deep satisfaction. "Mom, this is so weird. We got this letter saying our landlord changed, and the new person has the same name as you, Gail Richardson. What are the odds? Anyway, call me back. I wanted to ask you again about helping with the house down payment. Brad found an even better place, and we really need to move fast." She still wanted money. Even after I'd made it clear I wouldn't help them, she was still circling back to ask for financial assistance. The audacity was breathtaking, but it also confirmed everything I'd learned about who my children really were when they thought I was powerless. I didn't call her back. Instead, I drove to the duplex and parked across the street again, this time with a legitimate reason to be there. I was inspecting my property, checking on my investment, observing my tenants. The power dynamic had shifted completely, though they didn't know it yet. Jessica's car was in the driveway, a Honda sedan that I'd helped her buy 3 years ago when her old car broke down. She'd promised to pay me back for the down payment, but somehow the subject had never come up again. Another debt that had been forgotten in the comfortable assumption that Mom would always be there to absorb the financial losses. I watched her come out of the house carrying a laundry basket, and I felt a strange disconnect. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, but she was also a stranger. A stranger living in my property, benefiting from my investments, while treating me like an inconvenience. That evening, I called the duplex landline number listed on their lease agreement. Brad answered, his voice cautious in the way people sound when they don't recognize the caller ID. "This is Gail Richardson," I said in my most professional tone. "I'm the new owner of your rental property. I wanted to introduce myself and see if you had any questions about the management transition." There was a pause, then Brad's voice became friendlier. "Oh, hi. Yeah, we got your letter. Everything seems pretty straightforward. Same rent, same lease terms, right?" "That's correct. I'll be handling all aspects of property management going forward. Rent collection, maintenance requests, lease renewals, everything." "Great. Actually, I'm glad you called. We've been thinking about getting a dog. Small breed, very well trained. Is that something we could discuss?" A dog. They wanted to add a pet to the lease, which would require my approval as the landlord. The irony was perfect. My own daughter was asking my permission to get a dog, without having any idea who she was talking to. "I'll need to review the current lease terms and get back to you," I said. "Pet deposits and additional rent would apply, of course." "Of course. Whatever the standard rates are. We're good tenants, never any problems. We really love this place and want to stay long-term if possible." They loved this place. They wanted to stay long-term. They were asking permission and offering to pay additional fees. The conversation was surreal, hearing Brad speak to me with the respect and consideration he'd never shown when he knew who I was. "I'll be in touch," I said, and hung up before he could respond. Over the next few days, I found myself driving by the duplex regularly. Not to spy exactly, but to observe. I was learning things about my daughter and son-in-law that I'd never known. They kept the property immaculately maintained. Jessica had planted a small garden along the side of the house, and Brad had installed solar lights along the walkway. They treated my property better than they'd ever treated me. It was during one of these observation sessions that I saw something that made my blood boil. A moving truck was parked in front of the house next door, and Jessica was outside helping the new neighbors carry boxes. She was laughing and chatting, offering to help, being the kind of thoughtful person I'd raised her to be. This was the same daughter who'd been too busy to help her own mother to the hospital. The same person who'd claimed she couldn't miss a vacation because it was too expensive to cancel. But here she was, volunteering her time and energy for complete strangers, people she'd never met before. I watched her carry box after box, saw her bring the movers cold drinks, observed her genuine kindness toward people who meant nothing to her. And I realized that it wasn't that Jessica was incapable of caring or helping. She simply didn't think I deserved that consideration. That night, I made a decision that would escalate everything. I was going to schedule a formal property inspection. As the new landlord, I had the right to inspect the premises with proper notice. I would finally come face to face with my tenants in my new role, and they would have to treat me with the respect they'd never shown before. I drafted a formal notice, professional and legally compliant, giving them the required 72 hours advance warning. The inspection would take place on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. I hand-delivered the notice myself, slipping it under their door while they were at work, then driving away quickly before anyone could see me. Friday night, I could barely sleep. I spent hours planning what I would wear, what I would say, how I would conduct myself during the inspection. I wanted to be professional but observant, authoritative but not obviously hostile. I wanted them to see me as a landlord who demanded respect, not as the mother they'd been comfortable dismissing. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, perfect weather for what I had planned. I dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white blouse, pulled my hair back in a severe bun, and wore glasses I didn't really need. I looked like a landlord, someone serious and businesslike. I arrived at the duplex exactly at 10 o'clock and knocked firmly on the door. Jessica answered, and I watched her face carefully for any sign of recognition. There was a moment of confusion, a slight frown as she tried to place me, but then her expression cleared into polite tenant mode. "Mrs. Richardson? I'm Jessica Morrison. Thank you for giving us notice about the inspection." She didn't recognize me. My own daughter was looking right at me, speaking to me, and she had no idea who I was. The dark hair, the glasses, the formal clothes, and probably her own assumptions about what her mother looked like versus what a landlord should look like, had created perfect camouflage. "Ms. Morrison," I said, keeping my voice pitched slightly lower than normal. "I hope this time works for you and your husband." "Absolutely. Brad's at work, but I'm here. Please, come in." I stepped into the duplex, into the home my daughter had made with furniture I'd helped her buy, decorations we'd chosen together, photos of family members, including myself. It was surreal walking through the space as a stranger, seeing how they lived when they thought no one was watching. The apartment was beautiful. Jessica had always had good taste, and she'd made the space warm and inviting. Fresh flowers on the dining table, books arranged thoughtfully on shelves, everything clean and organized. She was clearly proud of her home, eager to show it off to her new landlord. "We've made a few small improvements," Jessica said, following me from room to room. "Nothing major, just some paint and decorative touches. I hope that's okay." "The improvements are lovely," I said honestly. "You've taken excellent care of the property." She beamed at the compliment, and for a moment I felt a pang of maternal pride. Then I remembered where we were and why, and the pride hardened into something more complex. In the bedroom, I noticed a framed photo on the nightstand. It was a picture of Jessica and Brad on their wedding day, smiling and radiant. I was in the background of the photo, wearing the blue dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. The one that had cost more than I could afford, but I'd bought anyway because I wanted to look nice for my daughter's wedding. "Beautiful wedding photo," I commented. Jessica glanced at it, and her expression grew slightly tense. "Thank you. It was a wonderful day, though the planning was stressful. Family dynamics, you know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. I remembered the arguments about the guest list, the budget, the venue. I remembered Jessica's frustration with me for not contributing more financially, even though I'd already given them everything I could spare. "Family can be complicated," I agreed. "My mother-in-law was pretty demanding," Jessica continued, apparently feeling the need to confide in her understanding landlord. "She had opinions about everything, wanted to control every detail. She meant well, but it was overwhelming." I almost laughed. She was talking about her own mother to her mother, complaining about behavior that sounded nothing like how I'd actually acted during their wedding planning. I'd been supportive and accommodating, agreeing to whatever they wanted, stretching my budget to help make their day perfect. "That must have been difficult," I said. "It was. And lately she's been acting really strange. We needed help with something important, and she just refused. No explanation, no discussion, just no. It's not like her at all." "Perhaps she has her own struggles you're not aware of," I suggested carefully. Jessica shrugged. "Maybe, but we're family. When family needs help, you help. That's how it works." The hypocrisy was staggering. When family needs help, you help, unless that family member needs support during major surgery. Then you abandon them at an airport and go skiing instead. We continued the inspection, and Jessica showed me everything with obvious pride. The herb garden she'd planted, the energy-efficient improvements Brad had made, the careful way they'd arranged furniture to maximize space. They'd turned my property into a real home, and despite everything, I was proud of them for it. But I was also increasingly angry. They were capable of love and care and attention to detail. They were capable of being good tenants, good neighbors, good people. They just weren't capable of being good children, at least not to me. "Everything looks excellent," I said as we finished the tour. "You're clearly responsible tenants who take pride in your home." "Thank you. We really do love living here. Actually, I was hoping to ask about the lease renewal. Our current lease expires in 6 months, and we'd love to stay." "I'll certainly consider it," I said. "Rent rates will be adjusted to current market value, of course." A shadow crossed Jessica's face. How much of an increase are we talking about? I haven't completed the market analysis yet. I'll let you know. The truth was, I hadn't thought about raising their rent. But seeing her worry about it, seeing her suddenly concerned about money when she'd been so cavalier about asking me for $30,000, gave me a sense of satisfaction. We're actually trying to save money to buy a house, Jessica said. My mother was supposed to help us with the down payment, but she backed out at the last minute. No explanation, just left us hanging. That must be frustrating, I said. It is. We've been counting on that help for months. Now we're stuck here longer than we planned, and if the rent goes up significantly, it'll push back our home buying timeline even more. I felt a moment of sympathy for her genuine disappointment, followed immediately by incredulity at her complete lack of self-awareness. She was complaining to a stranger about her mother's refusal to give her money, with no mention of why that mother might be upset, no acknowledgement of any wrongdoing on her part. Perhaps your mother has financial pressures of her own, I suggested. She's always been able to help before. She helped with our wedding, co-signed loans, covered expenses when we needed it. I don't understand what's changed. What had changed was that I'd learned my value, both financial and personal. What had changed was that I'd realized being taken for granted was a choice, not a requirement. What had changed was that I'd discovered self-respect. People's circumstances change, I said. Perhaps she's learned to prioritize her own needs. Jessica looked at me with surprise, as if the idea of a mother prioritizing her own needs was shocking. I suppose, but it's still disappointing. Families should be there for each other. Yes, I agreed. They should. I finished the inspection and prepared to leave, but Jessica seemed reluctant to let me go. She was clearly hoping to build a relationship with her new landlord, to establish the kind of rapport that might lead to favorable treatment. Would you like some coffee before you go? She offered. I just made a fresh pot. The offer was tempting, not because I wanted coffee, but because I was curious to see how she would interact with me in a social setting. But I decided it was too risky. The longer I stayed, the more likely it became that she'd recognize something familiar about me. Thank you, but I have other appointments today, I said. I'll be in touch about the lease renewal and rent adjustment. Of course. And about the dog we discussed? I'll need to review the pet policy and get back to you. I left the duplex feeling energized and conflicted. Seeing Jessica's life up close, seeing how well she'd maintained my property and how much she valued her home, had reminded me of the daughter I'd raised. But hearing her casual dismissal of my needs and her complete lack of insight into her own behavior had reinforced everything I'd learned about who she'd become. The power dynamic had shifted completely. She'd been respectful, almost deferential, eager to please her new landlord. She'd shown me more consideration in 1 hour than she'd shown me in the months leading up to my surgery. That afternoon, I researched rental rates in the neighborhood and discovered that I could legally raise their rent by nearly $300 a month and still be within market range. The knowledge was intoxicating. I had the power to make their lives significantly more difficult, to force them to move, to disrupt their comfortable existence the way they'd disrupted mine. But I wasn't ready to use that power yet. I was enjoying the game too much, the slow revelation of control. They still didn't know who I was, and I wanted to keep it that way for a while longer. Over the next few weeks, I established a pattern of landlord communications that kept them slightly off balance. I would call with questions about maintenance, send formal letters about property policies, and schedule occasional drive-by inspections that kept them conscious of being watched. Each interaction was professional but cold, giving them no sense of security in their tenancy. They were model tenants trying to please a landlord who seemed impossible to satisfy, and I could see the stress beginning to affect them. Brad called me one evening, his voice tense. "Mrs. Richardson, I wanted to follow up on our request about getting a dog. It's been 2 weeks, and we haven't heard back from you." "I'm still reviewing the policy," I said. "Pet ownership requires careful consideration. We're willing to pay whatever deposit and monthly fee you require. We're responsible people, and we really want to make this work." Responsible people. If only he knew how irresponsible they'd been when it really mattered. "I'll have a decision for you by the end of the month," I said, then hung up before he could respond. I was establishing myself as a difficult landlord, someone who held all the power and used it arbitrarily. They were learning what it felt like to be dependent on someone who didn't seem to care about their needs or desires. The psychological pressure was working. Jessica called me the following week, her voice strained. "Mrs. Richardson, I wanted to discuss our lease renewal again. We're really hoping to stay, and we want to know what we can do to make that happen. Rent will increase to market rate," I said bluntly. "I'm still determining what that figure will be. Could you give us a ballpark estimate? We're trying to budget for next year." $1,500 per month, I said, naming a figure that was $200 more than they were currently paying but still below true market rate. There was a sharp intake of breath. "That's a significant increase. That's market rate for a property of this quality in this neighborhood. We'll need to discuss it and get back to you. Take your time. But remember, I have other interested parties if you decide not to renew." It was a lie. I had no other interested parties, and I didn't want any. But the threat served its purpose. Jessica's voice became panicked. "No, we definitely want to stay. We just need to figure out how to make the numbers work. I understand. Financial planning can be challenging." That night, I sat in my living room and felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I was winning the game I'd created, but the victory felt hollow. These were my children I was manipulating, my own flesh and blood. Part of me wanted to reveal myself and try to repair our relationship, but then I remembered the airport. I remembered sitting alone in that terminal, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me most. I remembered their casual cruelty, their complete dismissal of my fear and pain. They'd made their choices. Now they had to live with the consequences. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, when I received a text from Marcus that made my blood boil. "Mom, Jessica told me about their rent going up. Their landlord sounds like a real witch. Maybe you could help them out with the increase since you wouldn't help with the house down payment?" He wanted me to help them pay rent to myself. The absurdity was breathtaking, but it also revealed how completely they still saw me as their personal bank account. Even when I'd refused to help them before, they were still circling back for more money. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time to stop playing games and start implementing real consequences. I called Jessica directly. "This is Mrs. Richardson," I said when she answered. "I need to schedule another property inspection for this weekend." "Another inspection? We just had one a month ago. Is there a problem? I'm considering some property improvements that would affect your unit. I need to take detailed measurements and photos." "Of course. Saturday morning again?" "Saturday at 10, I confirmed. But this time, I had a different plan. This time I wasn't going to hide who I was. This time, I was going to let them see exactly who held the power in their lives. Saturday morning, I dressed differently. Instead of the severe landlord costume, I wore clothes Jessica would recognize. A blue sweater she'd given me for Christmas, jeans I'd worn to family dinners, my regular glasses instead of the fake ones. I styled my hair the way I usually did, and wore the small gold earrings David had given me for our anniversary. I looked like myself. I looked like their mother. At exactly 10 o'clock, I knocked on the door of Unit A. Jessica answered, and I watched her face change as recognition dawned. Her mouth fell open, her eyes widened, and she actually stepped backward. "Mom?" "Hello, Jessica. May I come in? I'm here for the scheduled property inspection." She stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to process what was happening. You're Mrs. Richardson? You're our landlord?" "I'm your landlord," I confirmed. "I own this building. I've owned it for years, though I only recently took over direct management." "But how? When?" "I don't understand. Your father bought this property as an investment years ago. It was held in trust after his death. I inherited it, along with several other assets you're not aware of." Jessica's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally something that looked like anger. "You've been lying to us. You've been pretending to be someone else. I've been being exactly who I am, your landlord, the person who controls whether you have a place to live. This is insane. This is manipulative and cruel." "Really?" I stepped into the apartment, forcing her to back up further. "More manipulative and cruel than abandoning your mother at an airport when she was facing major surgery?" The color drained from Jessica's face. That's what this is about? You're still angry about that? Angry? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not angry, Jessica. I'm educated. I learned something important about my relationship with my children. Mom, we explained about the trip. We couldn't cancel it. But you could ask me for $30,000 while living in a property I own, paying rent money that ultimately comes to me anyway. Jessica sank into a chair, the full implications finally hitting her. You've been collecting our rent this whole time. Through a management company, yes. But now I'm handling things directly. So when we asked you for money for the house, you were asking someone who was already financially supporting you to support you even more, while treating that same person like a burden who wasn't worth staying in town for. We didn't know. You didn't know I owned the building. But you did know I'd just had major surgery. You did know I was scared and alone. You did know I needed help, and you chose a ski vacation instead. Jessica put her head in her hands. What do you want from us? It was a good question, and I realized I didn't have a simple answer. I'd wanted justice, revenge, recognition of how badly they'd treated me, but now that I had them at my mercy, I wasn't sure what justice actually looked like. I want you to understand, I said finally. I want you to know what it feels like to be dependent on someone who doesn't care about your needs. So you're going to kick us out? Raise our rent until we can't afford to stay? I haven't decided yet. That depends on you. What do you mean? I looked around the apartment they'd made into a home, at the life they'd built with my unwitting financial support. They'd been good tenants, and despite everything, I was still their mother. I mean that actions have consequences, I said. And it's time for you and your brother to learn what those consequences look like. Marcus doesn't live here. Why are you punishing him? Marcus supported your decision to abandon me. Marcus suggested I help you pay rent to myself because I wouldn't give you money for a house down payment. Marcus is part of this. Jessica looked up at me with something that might have been fear. What are you going to do? I'm going to be the landlord you've been dealing with. Professional, distant, focused on my own interests. I'm going to treat you exactly the way you've been treating me. That's not fair. Fair? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Was it fair to leave me alone in a hospital? Was it fair to ask me for money while you were living in my property? Was it fair to dismiss my pain and fear because it was inconvenient for your vacation schedule? Jessica started to cry, and for a moment my maternal instincts kicked in. I wanted to comfort her, to fix whatever was wrong, to make everything better. But then I remembered that this was exactly the dynamic that had gotten me abandoned in the first place. I need you to leave, she said through her tears. This is my property, I reminded her. I'll leave when I'm finished with my inspection. I walked through the apartment methodically, taking photos and making notes, while Jessica sat in the living room crying. It was a performance, partly for effect, and partly because I needed time to think about what came next. When I was finished, I sat down across from her. Your lease expires in 5 months. I'll honor the current terms until then. After that, we'll see. Are you going to tell Brad? That's up to you, but he'll find out eventually. The rent checks will be made out to me personally from now on. Jessica nodded miserably. I'm sorry, Mom. About the airport, about everything. We made a mistake. Yes, I agreed. You did. I left her there in her beautiful apartment, in the home she'd created on the foundation of my property, my investment, my unwitting generosity. As I drove away, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The game had changed completely. They knew who held the power now, and they would have to live with that knowledge every month when they wrote their rent check to their mother. But winning didn't feel quite the way I'd expected it to feel. It felt necessary, but it also felt lonely. That evening, my phone rang. It was Marcus, his voice tight with anger. Mom, Jessica told me what you did. This is insane. You can't be our landlord. Why not? I own the property. Because you're our mother. This is weird and manipulative and wrong. What's wrong is children who abandon their mother when she needs them most, then ask her for money while living in her property. We made a mistake, okay? But this is crazy revenge. This isn't revenge, Marcus. This is reality. This is what our relationship actually looks like. when the power dynamic is clear. You're gonna destroy our family over this. Our family was destroyed when you left me alone at an airport. I'm just making the destruction visible. He hung up on me, which was probably for the best. I wasn't interested in arguing or justifying myself. I'd spent too many years doing that already. The next few weeks established a new normal. Jessica and Brad sent their rent payments directly to me, made payable to Gail Richardson, property owner. Every month, they had to write a check to the mother and mother-in-law they'd abandoned, had to acknowledge their dependence on someone they'd treated as expendable. I responded to their maintenance requests promptly but coldly. I handled their concerns professionally, but without warmth. I was exactly the kind of landlord I'd been pretending to be: efficient, distant, and focused on protecting my investment. The psychological pressure was intense, and I could see it affecting them. Jessica lost weight and looked tired whenever I saw her. Brad avoided me entirely, arranging to be at work whenever I needed to visit the property. But they stayed. Despite the awkwardness and tension, despite knowing that their mother was now their landlord, they stayed. Which told me something important. They needed this place more than they wanted to preserve their pride. 3 months after the revelation, Jessica called me with a request that surprised me. "Mom, I know things are weird between us, but I wanted to ask if you'd consider letting us break the lease early without penalty." "Why?" "We found a house we can afford. Not the one we wanted before, something smaller and less expensive. We can manage the down payment ourselves." "I see. And you're asking me to waive the lease-breaking penalties?" "Yes, as a favor, as a way to end this situation cleanly." I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to keep them trapped in this arrangement, to continue collecting rent from the children who'd abandoned me. But another part of me recognized that this might be an opportunity for a different kind of resolution. "I'll consider it," I said. "But I have conditions." "What conditions?" "You and Marcus both come to dinner at my house. You listen to what I have to say about how you've treated me. You acknowledge what you did wrong. And you commit to being better children going forward." There was a long pause. "That's all?" "That's all. And if we do that, you'll let us out of the lease?" "I'll let you out of the lease, and I'll give you your security deposit back, and I'll write you a positive landlord reference for your house purchase." Another pause. "Okay. Yes. We'll do it. This Sunday at 6, both of you." I hung up and sat back in my chair, wondering if I was making the right choice. The arrangement had given me power and satisfaction, but it hadn't given me back my children. Maybe it was time to try a different approach. Sunday arrived gray and cold, matching my mood. I'd spent hours preparing for this dinner. Not just the meal, but the conversation. I wanted to be clear about what had happened and what needed to change. But I also wanted to leave room for reconciliation. Jessica and Marcus arrived together, both looking nervous and uncomfortable. Brad had stayed home, probably to avoid the awkwardness of facing his mother-in-law in this new context. "Thank you for coming," I said, letting them into the house they'd grown up in. We sat down to dinner, and I could feel the tension in the air. Marcus kept glancing around the room as if seeing it for the first time, noticing the new furniture and improvements I'd made since my recovery. Jessica picked at her food and avoided eye contact. "I want to talk about what happened," I said when we'd finished eating. "And I want you to really listen." They both nodded, looking like children about to be lectured. "When you left me at that airport, when you chose your vacation over my surgery, you didn't just hurt my feelings. You showed me who I really am to you. You showed me that I'm only valuable when I'm useful, only worth caring about when it's convenient." "Mom," Jessica started, but I held up my hand. "Let me finish. For years, I gave you everything I had. Money, time, energy, emotional support. I sacrificed my own needs, my own security, my own happiness, to make sure you were okay. And the first time I needed something from you, you abandoned me." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "We made a mistake." "You made a choice," I corrected. "A choice that revealed your true priorities. Your comfort was more important than my fear. Your vacation was more important than my surgery. Your convenience was more important than my need." "We're sorry," Jessica said quietly. "I know you are. But sorry isn't enough anymore. I need you to understand that your actions have consequences, and that I won't accept being treated as disposable ever again. So what does that mean? Marcus asked. It means that I'm not your personal bank account anymore. It means that I'm not going to absorb the cost of your poor planning or bad decisions. It means that if you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on mutual respect and consideration. We can do that? Jessica said quickly. Can you? Because 3 months ago you were asking me for $30,000 while living in my property and paying me rent. You've been financially dependent on me without even knowing it, while treating me like a burden. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. They'd been living in my building, paying me money through a management company, while simultaneously asking me for more money and complaining about my unwillingness to help them. I want to understand something, I continued. How did you justify abandoning me at the airport? How did you convince yourselves that was okay? Jessica and Marcus looked at each other, and I could see them struggling with the question. We thought you were being dramatic, Marcus said finally. We thought you were exaggerating how serious the surgery was. I had spinal fusion surgery. I could have been paralyzed if something went wrong. We know that now, Jessica said. We didn't really understand it then. You didn't understand it because you didn't want to understand it. You didn't ask questions. You didn't listen when I tried to explain my fears. You didn't care enough to find out what I was going through. The truth was harsh, but it needed to be said. They'd been willfully ignorant of my situation because acknowledging it would have required them to sacrifice something for me. We were selfish, Marcus admitted. We were thinking about ourselves instead of you. Yes, you were, and that's exactly how you've been thinking about me for years. As someone who exists to serve your needs, not as a person with needs of my own. We sat in silence for a moment, letting that sink in. What do you want from us going forward? Jessica asked. I want you to see me as a person, not just as your mother. I want you to consider my feelings and needs when you make decisions that affect me. I want you to support me the way I've always supported you. We can do that, Marcus said. Can you? Because supporting me means being there when I'm scared or in pain, even if it's inconvenient. It means caring about my well-being, not just my ability to solve your problems. It means treating me with the same consideration you'd show a friend. We understand, Jessica said. I hope you do. Because this is your chance to rebuild our relationship on better terms. If you can't do that, if you go back to taking me for granted and treating me as disposable, then we'll stay in this landlord-tenant dynamic permanently. The threat was clear, and I could see it land. They understood that I now had power in our relationship, and that I was willing to use it. We don't want that, Marcus said quickly. We want to be better. Then prove it. Show me through your actions, not just your words. We talked for another hour, working through specific examples of how they'd failed me and what they needed to do differently. It was painful but necessary, like lancing a wound that had been festering for too long. When they left that night, I felt cautiously optimistic. They seemed genuinely remorseful and committed to change, but I also knew that real change takes time, and that I'd need to be vigilant about maintaining the boundaries I'd established. 2 weeks later, Jessica called with an update on their house purchase. The inspection went well, and we should close next month. I wanted to thank you for agreeing to let us out of the lease early. You're welcome. Have you found a moving company? We're going to do most of it ourselves, but we might movers. Or to solve the problem in some way. But she didn't. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said. We will. Actually, I wanted to ask if you'd like to see the house before we move. It's small, but it's ours, and we're really excited about it. The invitation surprised me. It felt like a genuine gesture of inclusion, not a manipulation or a setup for asking for something. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. When would be a good time? Maybe this weekend. Saturday afternoon? Saturday works for me. After I hung up, I realized this was the first time in months that Jessica had invited me somewhere without needing something from me. It felt like progress, though I remained cautiously guarded. Saturday afternoon, I drove to the address Jessica had given me. The house was in an older neighborhood, modest but well-maintained. It was exactly the kind of starter home young couples bought when they were being realistic about their finances rather than aspirational. I felt a flicker of pride that they'd chosen something within their means instead of overextending themselves. Jessica and Brad were waiting outside when I arrived, both looking nervous but excited. Brad nodded awkwardly when he saw me, clearly still uncomfortable with our new dynamic. I'd been his landlord for months now, and he still didn't quite know how to interact with me. "What do you think?" Jessica asked as we walked toward the front door. "It has good bones," I said, studying the structure. "Solid foundation, decent roof line. How old is it?" "Built in 1987. The inspection showed it's been well maintained. The previous owners really took care of it." She unlocked the door and led me inside. The house was smaller than the duplex, but it had character. Hardwood floors that needed refinishing, built-in bookcases that showed the home's age, a fireplace that would be cozy in winter. It felt like a real home, not just a place to live. "The kitchen needs updating," Brad said, gesturing toward the dated appliances and worn countertops. "But we can do that gradually." "It's functional," I agreed. "That's what matters when you're starting out." We toured the rest of the house, and I found myself genuinely impressed by their practical choices. They'd picked a house they could afford, in a neighborhood that was stable but not trendy, with problems they could fix over time rather than expensive issues that would drain their savings. "The backyard is what sold us," Jessica said, opening the sliding door to show me a small but private yard with mature trees and a small garden area. "I want to grow vegetables." "Your grandmother would have loved that," I said without thinking. "She always said there was nothing better than tomatoes from your own garden." Jessica smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "I remember her garden. I used to help her weed when I was little." "You were very good at it." "Very careful not to pull up the wrong plants." It was a small moment of connection, a shared memory that reminded us both of who we used to be to each other. I felt some of the tension between us ease. "Would you like some coffee?" Brad offered. We brought a thermos and some cups. "That would be nice." We sat on the small back deck, drinking coffee from paper cups and talking about their plans for the house. They were approaching it thoughtfully, with realistic timelines and budgets. They talked about painting rooms themselves, learning to do minor repairs, saving up for major improvements. "We're not going to overextend ourselves this time," Jessica said. We learned our lesson about trying to have everything perfect right away. I wondered if that lesson extended beyond homeownership to other areas of their lives, but I didn't ask. Progress was progress, and I didn't want to push too hard. "When do you close?" I asked. 3 weeks. We're excited but also nervous. It's a big step. It is, but you're making smart choices. As we prepared to leave, Jessica turned to me with an expression I recognized from her childhood, when she was working up the courage to ask for something important. "Mom, I wanted to ask you something, and I want you to know that it's okay if you say no." My guard went up immediately. Here it was, the request I'd been waiting for. The real reason for the house tour, the coffee, the friendly conversation. "What is it?" "Would you consider being one of our emergency contacts for the mortgage company? Not a cosigner or anything financial, just someone they can call if there's ever a problem reaching us." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. But she seemed genuinely hesitant, like she was afraid I'd think she was trying to use me again. "Just an emergency contact. Just an emergency contact. No financial responsibility, no obligations. We just need to list a local family member who knows us well." It was such a small request, so different from the $30,000 ask that had started this whole mess. But it was also significant in its own way. They were asking me to be part of their safety net, not their bank account. "I can do that," I said. "Really? You don't mind?" "I don't mind." Jessica hugged me then, quickly and impulsively, like she used to when she was little. "Thank you. For everything. For letting us out of the lease. For being patient with us. For giving us another chance. You're my daughter," I said simply. "I want you to succeed." Driving home, I felt cautiously optimistic about our relationship for the first time since the airport incident. They seemed to be making better choices, treating me with more consideration, approaching their problems with more maturity. It wasn't the complete transformation I might have hoped for, but it was progress. The next few weeks passed quietly. Jessica and Brad prepared for their move, and I prepared for new tenants in the duplex. I'd already received several applications from the property management company, and I was looking forward to having renters who didn't come with decades of family baggage. It was during this transition period that Marcus called with news that surprised me. "Mom, I wanted to let you know that I broke up with Sarah." Marcus had been dating Sarah for 2 years, and I'd assumed they were heading toward marriage. She was nice enough, though I'd always felt like she looked down on me slightly. She worked in finance and made significantly more money than Marcus, which seemed to create an uncomfortable dynamic between them. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I meant it. "I'm not, actually. I realized some things about myself and about what I want in a relationship. Such as? Such as the fact that I was dating someone who treated my family the same way I've been treating you. Sarah never wanted to spend time with you, never wanted to include you in our plans. She thought you were beneath us somehow." I was quiet, processing this unexpected insight. "I didn't see it before," Marcus continued. "Or I saw it but I didn't care because it was convenient. But after everything that happened with the surgery and the duplex situation, I started paying attention to how she talked about you. And I realized that I didn't want to be with someone who couldn't respect my mother." "That's very mature of you," I said carefully. "I also realized that I learned that attitude from somewhere. That I'd been treating you the same way she was, like you weren't important enough to consider." This was the most self-aware conversation I'd ever had with Marcus. I wasn't sure how to respond. "I'm glad you're thinking about these things," I said finally. "I've been thinking about a lot of things. About how we acted when you needed surgery. About how we've taken you for granted. About how we've treated you like our personal ATM instead of our mother." "Marcus, let me finish. I know I can't undo what we did. I know saying sorry isn't enough. But I want you to know that I understand now. I understand what we did wrong, and I understand why you did what you did with the duplex." "You do? You showed us what it felt like to be powerless. You showed us what it felt like to be dependent on someone who didn't care about our feelings or needs. It was a lesson we needed to learn." I felt tears prick my eyes. This was the acknowledgement I'd been waiting for, the understanding I'd hoped they would reach. "It wasn't just about teaching you a lesson," I said. "I was hurt and angry, and I wanted you to feel what I felt." "I know. And we deserved it." We talked for another hour, working through specific incidents and patterns of behavior. Marcus acknowledged things I'd never expected him to see, apologized for things I'd never expected him to remember. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. "I want to do better," he said before we hung up. "I want to be the kind of son you deserve. You already are, just by having this conversation." But even as I said it, I remained cautious. People could change, but it took time and consistency. Words were easy, actions were harder. The proof came 2 weeks later, when I ended up in the emergency room with what turned out to be a kidney stone. The pain was excruciating, and I barely managed to drive myself to the hospital before it became unbearable. I called Marcus from the ER, not because I expected him to come, but because I needed someone to know where I was in case something serious was wrong. "I'm on my way," he said immediately. No hesitation, no questions about inconvenience or timing. He arrived within an hour, still in his work clothes, looking worried and out of breath. "How are you feeling? What did the doctor say?" "Kidney stone. They gave me pain medication and said it should pass in a few days. Do you need anything? Can I call anyone else?" "I'm fine. I just wanted someone to know where I was." "I'm staying until they discharge you." "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. That's what family does." He stayed for the next 4 hours, through the medical tests and the waiting and the eventual discharge instructions. He helped me to his car, drove me home, and came inside to make sure I had everything I needed. "I can stay tonight if you want," he offered, "in case the pain gets worse." "I'll be fine. The medication is working." "Are you sure?" "I don't mind sleeping on the couch." I looked at my son, this man who'd abandoned me at an airport 6 months ago, who was now offering to spend the night on my couch in case I needed help. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was real. "I'm sure. But thank you for offering." He hugged me goodbye, carefully because of my pain, and promised to call the next day to check on me. True to his word, he called the following morning, and the morning after that. He offered to bring groceries, to help with household tasks, to drive me to follow-up appointments. He was being the son I'd always hoped he could be. Jessica's transformation was slower, but equally real. She moved into her new house without asking for help or money, handled the closing process independently, and invited me to a housewarming party where she introduced me to her new neighbors as her mother, not as a burden or an obligation. The party was small and casual, nothing fancy, but Jessica was clearly proud of her home and wanted to share it with people she cared about. She made a point of including me in conversations, asking my opinion about her decorating choices, treating me like a valued guest rather than an unwelcome relative. "Your daughter has wonderful taste," one of the neighbors commented to me. "She's made this place feel like a real home." "She always was good at that," I agreed, feeling a surge of maternal pride. Later, as I was preparing to leave, Jessica walked me to my car. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It meant a lot to have you here. Thank you for inviting me. I know things have been difficult between us. I know we have a lot to make up for. But I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you did. Even the hard stuff with the duplex. It helped me understand things I needed to understand. Such as the fact that you're not just my mother. You're a person with your own needs and feelings and limits." I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. We all lose sight of things sometimes. I want to be better. I want to be the kind of daughter who's there when you need me, not just when I need something from you. You're already becoming that person. She hugged me goodbye, and for the first time in months, it felt like a real hug between a mother and daughter who genuinely cared about each other. Driving home, I reflected on how much had changed since that day at the airport. I'd gone from being a powerless victim to someone who controlled her own life and relationships. I'd learned to set boundaries, to demand respect, to put my own needs first when necessary. But more importantly, I'd given my children the chance to become better people by showing them the consequences of their actions. By refusing to enable their selfishness, I'd forced them to confront their behavior and choose who they wanted to be. The relationship wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect. But it was honest now, based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. They treated me like a person whose feelings mattered, whose needs were valid, whose presence was valued rather than tolerated. 6 months after the duplex revelation, I received a call that tested everyone's growth. "Mom." Jessica's voice was shaky. "Brad was in a car accident. He's in the hospital." My first instinct was to ask what she needed from me, but I caught myself. This wasn't about what she needed from me. This was about what I could offer as her mother. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Broken leg, possible concussion. He's going to be okay, but he'll be off work for a while." "What can I do to help?" There was a pause, like she was surprised by the question. "I don't know. I'm scared, and I don't know what to do about money and medical bills and—" "I'm coming to the hospital. We'll figure it out together." "You don't have to." "I want to." That's what mothers do. I spent the next several hours at the hospital with Jessica, helping her navigate insurance paperwork, talking to doctors, making sure she ate something while we waited for Brad to be released. When he was finally discharged, I drove them home and helped Jessica get him settled. "We might need to ask for an extension on the mortgage payment," Jessica said quietly as I was preparing to leave. "With Brad out of work, how much do you need?" I asked. She looked surprised. I wasn't asking for money, I was just thinking out loud. "I know, but I'm offering. How much would help?" "Mom, we can't accept money from you." "Not after everything that happened." "Why not?" "Because we don't want to go back to that dynamic where we're always taking from you. This is different. This is helping family during a crisis, not enabling poor choices or laziness. There's a distinction." She thought about it for a moment. "One mortgage payment would give us breathing room until Brad's disability insurance kicks in. Consider it done. We'll pay you back." "I know you will." And I did know. The Jessica who'd asked me for $30,000 for a house down payment while living in my rental property would have taken the money and found reasons why paying it back was difficult or unfair. But this Jessica, the one who'd learned about consequences and respect, would honor her debts. She paid me back in monthly installments over the following 6 months, never late, never making excuses. She treated the loan like the serious obligation it was, and she thanked me regularly for helping them through a difficult time. Marcus's growth showed itself in different ways. He started calling me regularly, not because he needed something, but because he wanted to maintain a relationship. He remembered my birthday without being reminded, invited me to dinner just to spend time together, and included me in his social plans. When he started dating someone new, a teacher named Amy, who was kind and unpretentious, he made sure she understood how important I was to him. Amy treated me with genuine warmth and respect, and I could see that Marcus had learned to value women who treated his family well. "I like her," I told him after the first time I met Amy. "I'm glad. Her opinion of you matters to me too." "Really? Really?" I learned that the way someone treats your family says everything about their character. "Amy loves hearing stories about you, about how you raised us, about the sacrifices you made. She thinks you're remarkable." "She seems lovely." "She is. And she wants to get to know you better, not because she has to, but because she wants to." It was a small thing, but it represented a huge shift in how Marcus approached relationships and family dynamics. A year after the airport incident, my children threw me a surprise birthday party. Not a big elaborate affair, just a small gathering with Amy, a few of my friends, and my neighbors Rosa and her family. But it was thoughtfully planned and genuinely celebratory. "We wanted to thank you," Jessica said when she gave her impromptu speech. "Not just for everything you've done for us over the years, but for teaching us how to be better people. We weren't very good children for a while, and you could have given up on us. Instead, you found a way to show us what we needed to learn. You showed us that love isn't the same as enabling," Marcus added. "You showed us that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept poor treatment. You taught us that respect has to go both ways," Jessica continued. "That being family doesn't give you permission to take advantage of someone or treat them poorly." I felt tears in my eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. They understood. They really understood what had happened and why, and they'd become better people because of it. "Most importantly," Marcus said, "you taught us that you're not just our mother. You're a complete person with your own life and needs and boundaries. We're sorry it took us so long to see that." The party was perfect, not because everything went smoothly, but because it represented something real. It represented a family that had been broken and had found a way to heal, not by ignoring what had happened or pretending it didn't matter, but by facing it honestly and doing the work to rebuild. As I looked around the room at the people celebrating with me, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd gotten revenge on my children, though there had been elements of that, but because I'd refused to accept being treated poorly, and in doing so, I'd given everyone the chance to become better. The duplex situation had been about power and consequences, but it had also been about love. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes love means letting people face the results of their choices. Sometimes love means refusing to enable bad behavior, even when that behavior comes from people you care about deeply. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, sitting alone in that hospital room, abandoned by her children and facing surgery without support. That woman had felt powerless and forgotten, used up and discarded. She couldn't have imagined that her lowest moment would become the catalyst for reclaiming her life and relationships. I thought about David, who'd set up the financial safety net that had made everything possible. He'd given me the tools to become independent, to demand respect, to choose my own terms for relationships. I wished he could see how it had all turned out. But mostly, I thought about the future. I had my children back, but on better terms. I had financial security and emotional boundaries. I had friends and interests, and a life that belonged to me. I had learned that being alone was better than being taken for granted, and that knowledge had paradoxically brought me closer to the people I loved. The birthday party wound down late, with Jessica and Marcus staying to help clean up. We worked together easily, like we used to when they were younger, before relationships became complicated by adult resentments and expectations. "This was wonderful," I told them as we finished putting away dishes. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for giving us the chance to do it right this time, Jessica said. We love you, Mom, Marcus added. Not just because you're our mother, but because of who you are as a person. I love you too, both of you. And I meant it. I loved them not despite what had happened, but partly because of it. The crisis had forced all of us to grow, to become more honest, to build something stronger than what we'd had before. As they prepared to leave, Jessica turned back with one more thing to say. I never thanked you properly for the duplex situation. I know it was hard for you to do, and I know we made it necessary by our behavior. But it changed my life. It made me a better person, a better wife, a better daughter. So thank you. You don't need to thank me for that. Yes, I do. Because it would have been easier for you to just keep enabling us, keep letting us treat you poorly, keep sacrificing yourself for our convenience. Instead, you chose the harder path that led to real growth. That took courage. After they left, I sat in my quiet house and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. It had started with abandonment and betrayal, with the worst moment of my relationship with my children. But it had led to honesty and respect, and a kind of love that was more mature and sustainable than what we'd had before. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the photos from the party. Pictures of my children laughing, of Amy helping in the kitchen, of friends and families celebrating together. Pictures of a life rebuilt on stronger foundations. Tomorrow, I would wake up in my own house, in the life I'd chosen for myself. I would make decisions based on my own needs and desires, not on guilt or obligation. I would interact with my children as equals, people who treated me well because they chose to, not because they had to. The transformation was complete. I'd gone from victim to victor, from powerless to empowered, from taken for granted to genuinely valued. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it had also been the most necessary. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be a victim. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is the opportunity to become better people. Sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to be willing to lose it. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. I had my family back, but more importantly, I had myself back. And that, I'd learned, was the foundation everything else had to be built on. 2 years later, I received an unexpected phone call that would test everything we'd rebuilt together. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone rang, and Dr. Martinez's name appeared on the screen. My heart rate immediately spiked, remembering the last time he'd called with news about my spine. Gail, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I wanted to discuss your recent MRI results. I'd gone in for my routine 2-year follow-up, expecting the usual good news about my surgical recovery. The appointment had seemed normal, Dr. Martinez examining my range of motion and asking about pain levels. I'd felt confident and healthy walking out of his office. What did the scan show? I asked, settling into my favorite chair. There's some concerning inflammation around the surgical site. It's not immediately dangerous, but it's something we need to monitor closely. I'd like to schedule you for another procedure, nothing as major as your original surgery, but it will require general anesthesia and overnight observation. The words hit me like a physical blow. Another surgery, another hospital stay, another moment of vulnerability when I'd need support from the people who mattered most to me. When are we talking about? I managed to ask. I'd like to schedule it within the next few weeks. The sooner we address this, the better the outcome will be. After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my living room, processing what this meant. 2 years ago, the prospect of another surgery would have terrified me, not just because of the medical risks, but because I would have faced it alone. Now I had choices about who to tell and when, confidence that I wouldn't be abandoned, trust that my family would step up when I needed them. But there was still a part of me that worried. What if the growth we'd all experienced wasn't as solid as it seemed? What if, when faced with another inconvenient medical crisis, my children would revert to their old patterns of behavior? I decided to call Marcus first, partly because he lived closer, and partly because I wanted to test the waters before telling Jessica. Mom, what's up? He answered on the second ring, his tone immediately warm and attentive. I got some news from Dr. Martinez today. I need another procedure on my back. What kind of procedure? Is it serious? Minor surgery, but it requires anesthesia and an overnight stay. He wants to do it soon. Okay, tell me what you need. When is it scheduled? The response was so immediate, so different from 2 years ago, that I felt tears prick my eyes. No hesitation, no questions about timing or convenience, just an immediate offer to help. I haven't scheduled it yet. I wanted to talk to you and Jessica first. Do you want me to come with you to the scheduling appointment? I can take time off work. You don't have to do that. I want to. Last time, you went through this alone, and that's not happening again. We talked for another 20 minutes, with Marcus asking detailed questions about the procedure, the recovery timeline, and what kind of support I might need afterward. He was treating this like a family crisis that required careful planning and coordination, not like an inconvenience to be minimized. Have you told Jessica yet? He asked. You're the first person I called. She's going to want to be involved too. We both learned our lesson about what happens when we're not there for you. After we hung up, I called Jessica. Her reaction was equally immediate and supportive. Mom, I'm so sorry you have to go through this again. What can Brad and I do to help? I'm still figuring out what I'll need. Well, you're not doing this alone. We're going to be there every step of the way. Jessica, you don't have to. Yes, we do. We absolutely do. You were there for us when Brad got hurt. You've been there for everything important since then. This is what family does. The conversation continued with Jessica asking practical questions about timing, offering to coordinate with Marcus, suggesting that one of them could stay at my house during recovery to help with daily tasks. She was approaching this the same way Marcus had, as a family emergency that required all hands on deck. I want to come to the pre-op appointment with you, she said. I want to hear what the doctor says directly so I know how to best support you. That would be helpful. And Mom? I know this must be scary for you, especially after what happened last time. But I want you to know that we're different people now. We're not going to let you down again. After talking to both my children, I felt a cautious optimism about facing this medical challenge. They'd both responded with maturity and genuine concern, treating my needs as important rather than inconvenient. But the real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, when supporting me required actual sacrifice rather than just good intentions. I scheduled the surgery for 3 weeks out, giving everyone time to arrange their schedules. Dr. Martinez explained that the procedure would take about 2 hours, with an overnight stay for observation and pain management. Recovery would be faster than my original surgery, but I'd still need help at home for several days. Do you have a support system in place this time? He asked, clearly remembering our previous conversations about my family situation. Yes, I do. My children will be handling everything. That's wonderful to hear. Recovery is always easier when you have people who care about you. The days leading up to the surgery became a masterclass in how families should function during a crisis. Marcus took time off work to drive me to the preoperative appointments, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes about post-surgery care instructions. Jessica researched the procedure online and came prepared with questions about risks, recovery timelines, and warning signs to watch for. They coordinated with each other without involving me, dividing responsibilities based on their strengths and schedules. Marcus would handle the day of surgery and the immediate recovery period, while Jessica would take over for the following week when I needed help with household tasks and follow-up appointments. We've got a schedule worked out, Jessica told me during one of our planning conversations. Marcus will stay at your house the first 2 nights, then I'll take over for the rest of the week. Amy offered to help with meals, and Brad can handle any heavy lifting or household repairs you might need. You've really thought this through. We learned from our mistakes. Last time, we didn't think at all. We just assumed you'd be fine, and that our lives were more important than yours. We're not making that mistake again. The night before the surgery, Marcus came over for dinner, bringing groceries and cooking one of my favorite meals. It was a quiet evening, but comfortable in a way our interactions hadn't been for years before the duplex incident. Are you nervous? He asked as we cleaned up the dishes. A little. Not as much about the surgery itself, but about the recovery. I'm older now. And even minor procedures take longer to bounce back from. You're not doing this alone this time. We're going to make sure you have everything you need. I know, and I can't tell you how much that means to me. You shouldn't have to tell us. It should be obvious. We talked late into the evening, covering everything from practical recovery logistics to deeper conversations about how our family had changed over the past 2 years. Marcus was more reflective and self-aware than I'd ever seen him, able to acknowledge not just what he'd done wrong before, but why he'd done it. I think I was angry at you for needing anything from us, he admitted. It was easier to see you as this endlessly strong person who could handle everything alone, than to acknowledge that you were human and vulnerable and deserved our support. Why do you think that was? Because taking care of you would have required me to be less selfish. And I wasn't ready to be less selfish yet. What changed? Seeing what it felt like to be powerless changed everything. When you were our landlord, when we were dependent on your goodwill, and you didn't seem to care about our comfort or security, I finally understood how we'd been treating you. The morning of the surgery, Marcus arrived early with coffee and breakfast. He'd taken the entire day off work, arranged for Amy to handle anything that might come up, and cleared his schedule for the next several days. "Ready for this?" he asked as we drove to the hospital. "As ready as I can be. I'll be in the waiting room the whole time. Jessica wanted to be here too, but we decided it made more sense for her to save her time off for when you're home and need more hands-on help." The surgical check-in process was surreal compared to 2 years ago. Instead of sitting alone filling out paperwork, I had Marcus with me, asking questions and making sure I understood everything. When the nurse asked about my emergency contact, I gave them Marcus's information without hesitation. "Your son will be notified as soon as the procedure is complete," the nurse assured me. "He can see you in recovery before you're moved to your room." "Thank you." As they prepared to take me back to the operating room, Marcus hugged me carefully and promised to be there when I woke up. "I love you, Mom. You're gonna do great." "I love you too." The surgery went smoothly, just as Dr. Martinez had predicted. When I woke up in recovery, the first face I saw was Marcus, sitting beside my bed with a concerned but relieved expression. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Groggy, but okay." "How long was I out?" "About 3 hours total." Dr. Martinez said everything went perfectly. He removed the inflamed tissue, and the surgical site looks good. Over the next several hours, as I was moved to my room and began the recovery process, Marcus proved to be everything I could have hoped for in a caregiver. He helped me communicate with nurses, kept track of my medication schedule, and made sure I was comfortable and pain-free. When Jessica arrived that evening, she brought flowers and a care package with books, crossword puzzles, and snacks for later in my recovery. "You look good," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "Much better than I expected." "I feel pretty good, all things considered." Dr. Martinez stopped by earlier and talked to Marcus and me together. He's very pleased with how the surgery went. He said you should be feeling significantly better within a few weeks. The overnight stay passed peacefully, with Marcus sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair despite my protests that he should go home. In the morning, Jessica arrived early to help with the discharge process and drive me home. "Marcus needs to get some real sleep," she explained. "I'll take the first shift at your house, then he'll come back tomorrow evening." The level of coordination and mutual support between my children was remarkable. They'd learned to work together as a team, putting my needs first while also taking care of each other. It was the kind of family dynamic I'd always hoped for, but never quite achieved before our crisis. The first week of recovery was a revelation in how different my experience could be when I had genuine support. Jessica stayed at my house, sleeping in the guest room and handling everything from meal preparation to medication reminders. She worked from my kitchen table during the day, taking calls and managing her responsibilities while keeping an eye on my progress. "I can work from anywhere," she said when I worried about disrupting her schedule. This is more important. Marcus took over in the evenings, bringing dinner and staying late to help with anything Jessica couldn't handle during the day. Amy stopped by regularly with groceries and offers to help with household tasks. Even Brad contributed, handling yard work and minor home repairs that I couldn't manage while recovering. But what struck me most wasn't just the practical support, but the emotional care they showed. They checked on my pain levels regularly, encouraged me to rest when I tried to do too much, and kept me company when I was feeling restless or worried. "This is what we should have done last time," Jessica said one evening as we watched a movie together. "This is what family is supposed to look like. You're doing it now. That's what matters. But I keep thinking about you in that hospital room alone, scared and in pain, with no one to advocate for you or keep you company. It makes me sick to remember it. That experience taught us all something important. Without it, we might never have learned to do better." 2 weeks after the surgery, I was feeling strong enough to resume most of my normal activities. Dr. Martinez was pleased with my progress and confident that this procedure had addressed the inflammation issues permanently. "You've healed beautifully," he said during my follow-up appointment. "I don't anticipate any further problems with this surgical site." Marcus and Jessica had both insisted on coming to the appointment, wanting to hear the good news directly from the doctor. Their relief was palpable when he gave the all-clear. "Does this mean she can go back to all her regular activities?" Jessica asked. "Gradually, yes. She should avoid heavy lifting for another few weeks, but otherwise she can return to normal life." As we left the doctor's office, I felt a profound sense of gratitude not just for my physical recovery, but for the emotional healing our family had experienced. The crisis had brought out the best in my children, proving that the growth we'd achieved over the past 2 years was real and lasting. "I want to take you both to dinner," I said as we walked to the parking garage, "to celebrate and to thank you for everything you've done." "You don't need to thank us," Marcus said. "We were just doing what we should have done the first time." "I know I don't need to. I want to." We went to a nice restaurant, nothing too fancy but nicer than our usual family dinners. As we talked and laughed over our meal, I reflected on how different this experience had been from my original surgery. 2 years ago, I'd faced that challenge alone and emerged stronger but damaged in my relationships with my children. This time I'd faced it with their full support and emerged not just healed physically, but closer to them than ever. "I have something to tell you both," I said as we finished our dessert. "I've been thinking about making some changes to my estate planning." They both looked concerned, probably worried that I was planning to punish them financially for past mistakes. "Nothing dramatic," I assured them, "but I want to update my beneficiary information and make sure my will reflects the people you've become, not the people you used to be." "What does that mean?" Jessica asked. "It means that I trust you both again. Completely. It means that I know if something happens to me, you'll handle my affairs with love and respect, the same way you handled my recovery." "Mom," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "I also want to give you both something now, while I can enjoy watching you use it wisely." I reached into my purse and pulled out 2 envelopes I'd prepared earlier that week. "What's this?" Jessica asked, opening hers. "It's a check for the down payment on your next house. The one you really want, not just the one you can afford." Jessica stared at the check, her eyes widening. "Mom, this is too much. We can't accept this." "Yes, you can. You've proven that you can handle financial help responsibly. You paid back the money I lent you when Brad was hurt, you've managed your mortgage payments perfectly, and you've made smart choices about your spending." Marcus opened his envelope and found a similar check. "This is incredibly generous, but are you sure you can afford it?" "I'm sure. David left me well provided for, and I want to use some of that money to help you build the lives you want." "But what if we mess up again?" Jessica asked. "What if we go back to taking you for granted? Then you'll face the consequences, just like you did before. But I don't think that's going to happen. You've both proven that you've learned from your mistakes." We talked for another hour about their plans for the money, their gratitude for the opportunity, and their commitment to honoring the trust I was placing in them. The conversation reinforced my confidence that they'd grown into people worthy of this kind of support. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Jessica hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Mom. Not just for the money, but for giving us the chance to be better. For not giving up on us when we deserved it. Thank you for becoming the children I always knew you could be." 6 months later, I attended the housewarming party for Jessica and Brad's new home, a beautiful place in an excellent neighborhood that they'd been able to afford with my help and their own careful saving. The party was filled with their friends and colleagues, people who clearly respected and enjoyed their company. "Mom, I want you to meet Dr. Sarah Chen," Jessica said, introducing me to one of her new neighbors. "She's a pediatrician at Children's Hospital. It's wonderful to meet you," Dr. Chen said warmly. "Jessica talks about you all the time. She's so proud of how you raised her and her brother. She's become quite remarkable herself." She really has. She and Brad are exactly the kind of neighbors you hope for. Thoughtful, helpful, genuine people who care about their community. As the evening progressed, I met more of their friends and neighbors, all of whom spoke of Jessica and Brad with genuine affection and respect. They'd built a life based on the values I'd tried to teach them. Values that had gotten lost for a while but had ultimately taken root. Marcus arrived later with Amy, who was now wearing an engagement ring that sparkled on her left hand. "When did this happen?" I asked, admiring the ring. "Last weekend," Amy said, beaming. "He proposed at the park where we had our first date." "And you said yes?" "I did. How could I not? He's become such an incredible man." Marcus blushed at the compliment. "I had a good teacher," he said, looking at me meaningfully. "You had good instincts," I corrected. "You just needed to learn how to access them." As the party wound down, I found myself in Jessica's new kitchen, helping with dishes alongside Amy and several of their friends. It was comfortable and natural, the kind of easy family gathering I'd always dreamed of but rarely experienced. "Your children absolutely adore you," one of Amy's friends commented. "It's beautiful to see. They're pretty wonderful themselves." Marcus told me about how you taught them to be better people a couple of years ago. He said it was the hardest and most important lesson anyone ever gave him. Sometimes love requires tough choices. "It sounds like you made the right ones." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us all to this point. It had started with betrayal and abandonment, with the worst moment in my relationship with my children. But it had led to something stronger and more authentic than what we'd had before. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, sitting alone in that airport terminal, feeling powerless and forgotten. She couldn't have imagined that her darkest hour would become the catalyst for reclaiming not just her own life, but her relationships with the people she loved most. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. It had required courage to set boundaries, strength to maintain them, and wisdom to know when to extend grace. But it had been worth every difficult moment. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my house with satisfaction. It was truly mine now, filled with furniture I'd chosen, decorated according to my tastes, organized around my needs and preferences. But more importantly, it was a place where my family gathered by choice rather than obligation, where love was expressed through actions rather than just words. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Thank you for everything tonight, and for everything always. I love you, Mom." A moment later, another text from Marcus. "You looked so happy tonight. Thank you for never giving up on us." I smiled as I read their messages, then got out of my car and walked into my home. Tomorrow, I would wake up in a life I'd built for myself, surrounded by relationships I'd fought to save and improve. I would face whatever challenges came my way with the confidence of someone who'd learned her own worth and refused to settle for less than she deserved. The seasons changed, and with them came new opportunities to test the strength of our rebuilt relationships. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it an unexpected phone call that would challenge everything we'd learned about family, sacrifice, and love. It was Marcus who called with the news, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and uncertainty that I recognized from his childhood. "Mom, Amy and I have some news. Good news, but it's going to change things for all of us." "What kind of news?" "We're pregnant. Amy's about 8 weeks along, and everything looks healthy." I felt a surge of joy followed immediately by a complex mix of emotions. I was going to be a grandmother. My son was going to be a father. But I also remembered how new parents could become consumed with their own needs. How the arrival of a baby could shift family dynamics in unexpected ways. "That's wonderful news," I said, and meant it completely. "How are you both feeling?" "Excited, terrified, overwhelmed. All the things you'd expect, I guess." "That's normal. Being a parent is the most important job you'll ever have, and the most challenging. We were hoping to talk to you about something. Not right now, over the phone, but maybe this weekend? We'd like to come over for dinner and discuss some things." Of course, Saturday evening? Perfect. And Mom, thank you for being excited, instead of immediately jumping into advice mode. Amy was worried you might start telling us everything we're doing wrong before we've even started. I learned my lesson about unsolicited advice. You'll ask for my opinion when you want it. After we hung up, I sat in my garden with my morning coffee, thinking about what this pregnancy might mean for our family. 3 years ago, the prospect of becoming a grandmother would have filled me with anxiety about being used as free childcare while being taken for granted. Now I felt cautiously optimistic about being included in this new chapter of their lives. Saturday evening, Marcus and Amy arrived with flowers and a bottle of sparkling cider, both looking nervous but happy. Amy was beginning to show just slightly, her hand resting protectively on her small bump. "You look radiant," I told her honestly. "I feel like I'm constantly nauseous, but Marcus keeps telling me I'm glowing," she laughed. "He's right. There's something special about early pregnancy, even when you feel terrible." We had dinner first, talking about practical things like Amy's doctor, their insurance coverage, and their plans for telling Amy's family. It was comfortable conversation, the kind of easy sharing that had become normal between us over the past few years. Finally, as we were clearing the table, Marcus brought up what they'd really come to discuss. "Mom, we wanted to talk to you about something important. Amy's job doesn't offer paid maternity leave, and my company only gives 2 weeks of paternity leave. We're trying to figure out how to manage financially during those first few months." I waited, curious to see how they would approach asking for help, if that's what this was leading toward. "We've been looking at childcare options for when Amy goes back to work," Amy continued. "But infant care is incredibly expensive, and honestly, we're not comfortable leaving a tiny baby with strangers." "That's understandable," I said. "We were wondering," Marcus said carefully, "if you might be interested in providing childcare. Not for free," he added quickly. "We'd pay you the same rate we'd pay a professional nanny. We just thought, if you were interested, it might be a good arrangement for everyone." The offer surprised me. They weren't asking me to sacrifice my time and energy for their convenience. They were offering me a paid position that would allow me to be involved in my grandchild's life while contributing to the family's financial stability. "Tell me more about what you're thinking," I said. 3 days a week at our house," Amy explained. "Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Amy would work from home the other 2 days. You'd have weekends free, and we'd handle all the night care ourselves." "And you'd want to pay me for this?" "Of course," Marcus said firmly. "Your time is valuable, and caring for an infant is hard work. We wouldn't expect you to do it for free just because you're family." "What if I wanted to do it for free because I'm family?" Amy and Marcus exchanged glances. "We'd prefer to pay you," Amy said. "We want this to be a professional arrangement that respects your time and energy. If you're not happy with the situation, we want you to feel free to change your mind without feeling guilty about leaving us in a bind. And if we have disagreements about childcare approaches, then we'll talk them through like adults," Marcus said. "You're the grandmother, and we value your experience and opinions. But Amy and I are the parents, and ultimately the decisions are ours to make." I appreciated their thoughtfulness, their recognition that family relationships and professional arrangements could be complicated when mixed together. They'd clearly learned from our past struggles about the importance of clear boundaries and mutual respect. "I'd love to be involved in caring for my grandchild," I said. "But I want to think about the logistics for a few days before I commit to anything." "Of course. Take all the time you need." That week, I found myself imagining what it would be like to care for Marcus and Amy's baby 3 days a week. I thought about the joy of being so intimately involved in my grandchild's early development, but also about the responsibility and the potential for conflict if our parenting philosophies differed. I also thought about how this arrangement might affect my relationship with Jessica. Would she feel excluded or jealous if I was caring for Marcus's child but not involved in her life in the same way? Jessica and Brad weren't planning to have children anytime soon, but family dynamics could be complicated when grandparents seem to favor one child's family over another's. I decided to call Jessica and get her perspective before making my decision. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," she said when I explained the situation. "You'd be amazing with a baby, and it would be good for you to have that kind of purpose and connection." You don't think it would create problems between us? If I'm spending so much time with Marcus's family? Mom, you spent years giving us equal time and attention, and we still found ways to disappoint you. Now you have the chance to be involved with your grandchild in a meaningful way, and you're worried about fairness? I just don't want you to feel left out. I won't feel left out. I'll feel grateful that my nephew or niece is going to have such a loving, involved grandmother. And honestly, when Brad and I do decide to have kids, I hope you'll want to be involved with them too. Of course I would. Then don't overthink this. If you want to take care of Marcus's baby, do it. If it becomes too much, or if there are problems, you can always change the arrangement. With Jessica's blessing and my own growing excitement about the prospect, I called Marcus back and accepted their offer. Really? You want to do this? He asked, his voice filled with relief and joy. I really do. I think it could be wonderful for all of us. Amy is going to be so happy. She was worried we were asking too much of you. You're not. You're offering me the chance to be part of something beautiful. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and I found myself included in ways that felt natural and appropriate. Amy asked my opinion about baby gear and nursery setup, but she didn't expect me to make decisions or pay for things. Marcus shared ultrasound photos and updates about doctor's appointments, but he didn't burden me with every anxiety or complaint. They were treating me like a valued family member, whose input mattered, not like a servant whose job was to solve their problems, or a bank whose purpose was to fund their choices. In early fall, Jessica called with news of her own that would further test our family's growth. Mom, Brad got offered a promotion at work. It's a great opportunity, but it would mean relocating to Seattle. Seattle? That's quite a move. I know. It's exciting, but also scary. The money is significantly better, and it would be a big step up in his career. But it would mean leaving you, especially right when Marcus and Amy are about to have the baby. What do you want to do? I want to take it. The opportunity is too good to pass up. But I feel guilty about leaving you here alone, especially when you're about to become so involved with childcare. Jessica, you don't need to make career decisions based on taking care of me. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own life. I know you are, but I also know that family is important, and I don't want to miss out on being part of my nephew's or niece's life. Seattle isn't on another planet. You can visit, and I can visit you. Modern families figure out how to stay connected across distances. You really think we should take it? I think you should make the decision that's best for your family, without worrying about how it affects me. If this is the right move for you and Brad, then you should do it. What if we need help with something? What if you need help with something? Then we'll figure it out, just like any other family deals with being spread out geographically. The important thing is that we know we can count on each other when it really matters. Jessica and Brad decided to take the promotion, and their move was scheduled for right after the new year. It meant Jessica would be here for the birth of Marcus's baby, but would miss most of the early months of grandparenthood. I'm going to visit so often you'll get sick of me, she promised during one of our planning conversations. I'll never get sick of you visiting, but I also want you to build a life in Seattle that makes you happy, not spend all your time and money traveling back here. The baby arrived on a snowy December morning, 2 weeks before Jessica's planned move. Emma Rose was perfect, tiny, and healthy, and absolutely beautiful. I held her in the hospital just hours after her birth, feeling the profound love that only grandparents understand. She's incredible, I whispered to Amy, who was exhausted but radiant. She really is. I can't believe she's actually here. Marcus looked overwhelmed and proud and terrified all at once. I keep thinking I'm going to break her, he admitted. You won't break her. Babies are surprisingly resilient. Were you this scared when I was born? Absolutely. Every new parent feels that way. It means you understand how important this is. Jessica arrived that afternoon with flowers and gifts, immediately falling in love with her tiny niece. She looks just like Marcus did as a baby, she said, studying Emma's face. Same nose, same chin, same appetite. Amy laughed as Emma began rooting around looking for food. I'm going to miss so much, Jessica said wistfully. You're going to miss some things, I corrected. But you're also going to have your own adventures and experiences. And when you visit, Every moment will be special because it's not ordinary. Over the next few weeks, as Emma settled into life at home and Amy prepared to return to work part-time, I began my new role as grandmother caregiver. The arrangement worked beautifully from the start. I'd arrive at Marcus and Amy's house Monday mornings and spend the day caring for Emma, feeding her, playing with her, handling naps and diaper changes, and all the routine tasks of infant care. It was exhausting but deeply fulfilling. I'd forgotten how much joy there was in caring for a baby, how every small milestone felt like a major accomplishment. Emma's first smile, her first laugh, the way she'd calm down when I held her. These moments filled my days with purpose and happiness. Marcus and Amy were respectful of my methods and grateful for my help, but they also maintained clear boundaries about major decisions. When Emma had a fever, they consulted with the pediatrician themselves rather than expecting me to handle it. When she needed her first vaccinations, they took her to the appointments and made the decisions about timing and scheduling. "We want you to feel comfortable making day-to-day decisions about her care," Amy explained during one of our weekly check-ins. "But we want to handle all the medical and developmental milestones ourselves." That makes perfect sense. She's your daughter. "But we also want you to feel free to give us advice if you see something concerning, or if you have suggestions about her routine." The balance worked well. I felt trusted and valued, but not overwhelmed with responsibility that should belong to Emma's parents. I could enjoy being a grandmother without feeling like I was being taken advantage of as a caregiver. Jessica's move to Seattle went smoothly, and she called regularly to check on Emma's progress and stay connected with family news. Her first visit back, when Emma was 3 months old, was emotional and joyful. "She's grown so much," Jessica marveled, holding Emma carefully. "I can't believe how much she's changed in just 6 weeks." "Babies change fast at this age," I said. "But you'll be surprised how quickly you reconnect with her." And Jessica did reconnect quickly. Emma seemed to remember her aunt, settling contentedly in Jessica's arms, and studying her face with the serious concentration that babies use to catalog important people. "Tell me everything," Jessica said as we sat together while Emma napped. "What's her routine like? What are her favorite things? What has she been learning?" I shared all the small details that make up a baby's daily life, and Jessica listened with genuine interest and engagement. She wasn't just being polite. She really wanted to know about Emma's development and personality. "You're such a natural at this," she observed, watching me prepare Emma's bottle with practiced efficiency. "You were always good with babies, but you seem really happy doing this." "I am happy. It's nice to feel needed in a positive way, to have my experience valued instead of taken for granted. Marcus and Amy really appreciate what you're doing for them, and they show it. That makes all the difference." During Jessica's visit, we established a routine for staying connected that worked for everyone. Jessica would video call during Emma's morning routine twice a week, so she could see her niece awake and alert. She'd visit every other month, and I'd bring Emma to Seattle for a weekend visit once Amy was comfortable with longer trips. "This is going to work," Jessica said as she prepared to return to Seattle. "It's not the same as living close by, but we're going to stay connected." Distance doesn't have to mean disconnection, I agreed. As Emma grew from an infant into a more interactive baby, my role evolved as well. Instead of just handling basic care, I became her primary playmate and early teacher 3 days a week. We read books together, played simple games, explored the backyard, and developed routines that were ours alone. "She lights up when she sees you on Monday mornings," Amy observed. "She definitely knows you're someone special." "She's someone special, too. I love watching her discover new things." Marcus and I were talking, and we want you to know how grateful we are for this arrangement. Not just because it helps us financially, but because Emma is getting to know her grandmother in such a deep way. I'm the one who should be grateful. This is the best job I've ever had. And it was true. Caring for Emma had given me a sense of purpose and joy that I'd never experienced before. I was using my skills and experience in a way that was valued and appreciated, contributing to my family's well-being while building a relationship with my granddaughter that would last her entire life. The arrangement also seemed to have positive effects on my relationships with both my children. Marcus and I talked regularly about Emma's development and needs, conversations that naturally extended to other topics about our lives and plans. Amy included me in decisions about family traditions and holiday celebrations, treating me like a valued family member rather than hired help. Jessica, meanwhile, seemed to appreciate that I was happy and fulfilled, rather than lonely or needy. Our phone calls were more balanced, with both of us sharing news and experiences rather than the conversation revolving around my problems or needs. One evening, as I was finishing up with Emma's bedtime routine, Marcus sat down beside me with a serious expression. "Mom, I want to talk to you about something. What's on your mind?" Amy and I have been talking about the future, about what happens when Emma gets older and doesn't need full-time care anymore. I felt a pang of anxiety, wondering if they were planning to change our arrangement sooner than I'd expected. "We want you to know that this isn't just a temporary thing for us," he continued. "We'd like you to be part of Emma's life as she grows up, not just as her grandmother, but as someone who's actively involved in her care and development." What does that mean, practically? It means that when she's old enough for preschool, we'd still want you to pick her up and spend afternoons with her. When she starts school, maybe you could be the one who's available for sick days or school events when we can't be. We want you to be her primary caregiver after us. That's a big commitment on both our parts. We know, and we want to make sure it's what you want too. We don't want to assume that you'll always be available or that you don't have other plans for your life. I thought about what he was offering. Not just a job, but a central role in Emma's childhood. Not just occasional grandparent visits, but daily involvement in raising her. It was a level of family integration that I'd never experienced before. "I'd love that," I said honestly, "but I want us all to understand that circumstances might change. I might get older and less capable of providing care. You might decide you want different arrangements. Emma might have preferences about how she spends her time. Of course, we're not asking for a lifetime contract. We're just saying that as long as it works for everyone involved, we want you to be Emma's person after us." Her person? The adult in her life who knows her best, who she can count on, who's always in her corner. Amy and I will be her parents, but we want you to be her person. It was the most beautiful offer anyone had ever made me, not just to be useful or helpful, but to be essential. To be someone a child could count on completely, trust absolutely, love without reservation. "I would be honored to be Emma's person," I said, and meant it completely. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed over the past few years. I'd gone from being taken for granted and abandoned in my moment of greatest need to being valued and essential in my family's daily life. I'd learned to demand respect and found that, when I did, I was given not just respect but genuine love and appreciation. Emma was sleeping peacefully in her crib, secure in the knowledge that she was surrounded by adults who loved her and would take care of her. She would grow up in a family where boundaries were respected, where love was shown through actions as well as words, where everyone's needs and feelings mattered. I'd helped create that family, not just by raising Marcus and Jessica, but by refusing to accept poor treatment when they'd lost their way. By standing up for myself, I taught them to stand up for what was right. By demanding respect, I'd shown them how to give it. The woman who'd sat alone in that airport terminal would barely recognize the life I was living now. She'd been powerless and forgotten, useful only when convenient, disposable when inconvenient. Now I was essential and valued, needed, not just for what I could provide, but for who I was. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and prepare to spend another day with Emma, reading her stories and watching her discover the world around her. Tomorrow, Jessica would call from Seattle to check on her niece and share news from her new life. Tomorrow, Marcus and Amy would come home from work, grateful for the care I'd provided and the love I'd shared. Tomorrow, I'd continue living the life I'd fought to create, surrounded by family who chose to love me as much as I chose to love them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.